I've never been one to believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything that couldn't be explained by logic and reason. My friends often teased me about my pragmatic view of the world, especially since I had a hobby that seemed at odds with my skepticism. I loved to collect antiques. There was something about holding a piece of history in my hands that I found incredibly grounding. Little did I know, one of my finds would challenge everything I believed about the world. It was a crisp, autumn Saturday when I found it. The local flea market was bustling with the usual crowd, vendors displaying their wares on tables cluttered with objects each holding stories of their past. I meandered through the stalls, my eyes scanning for anything unique, when I stumbled upon a peculiar stand. It was tucked away in a corner, away from the busier paths, and manned by an old man whose eyes seemed to hold centuries of secrets. Among the collection of items, a small box caught my attention. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, made of dark wood and adorned with intricate carvings that depicted what appeared to be some sort of ritual. The figures carved into the wood seemed to dance in the light, their expressions both mesmerizing and slightly unsettling. The old vendor noticed my interest and, with a knowing look, told me it was very old, from a place far away and with a story as dark as its wood. Despite a feeling of unease that I couldn't quite shake, my curiosity won. I haggled briefly over the price, driven more by habit than the desire to save a few dollars, and soon the box was mine. I left the flea market with my prize, eager to add it to my collection, unaware of the chain of events I had just set into motion. The first few days with the box were uneventful. It took a place of honor on my bookshelf, its mysterious carvings a conversation starter for the few friends I invited over. They, like me, were drawn to its craftsmanship but also commented on the odd feeling it gave them, a sentiment I brushed off as superstition. However, it wasn't long before strange occurrences began to manifest. It started subtly, with items around my apartment seeming to move on their own. Books I had left on the table were found on the floor, and a vase of flowers inexplicably moved from one windowsill to another. I rationalized these events as forgetfulness on my part, despite a nagging feeling that something was amiss. Then, the electronic disturbances began. My television would turn on in the middle of the night to static, filled screens, and my phone would randomly dial numbers from my contact list without any input from me. Each incident was easily explained away, electrical malfunctions, glitches, but the frequency and timing of these events, always in the dead of night, began to fray my nerves. The most disturbing occurrences, however, were the feelings of being watched. It was an oppressive sensation, one that filled the room whenever I was near the box. Shadows in my peripheral vision seemed to move, darting away when I turned to look directly at them. The air around the box felt colder, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, the result of working too hard and sleeping too little, but the part of me that thrived on logic and reason couldn't ignore the pattern that was emerging. Something about the box was not right. As the days turned into weeks, the disturbances grew more pronounced. The whispers started soon after. They were faint at first, so soft I thought I was imagining them, but they grew louder, more insistent, voices murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. They seemed to emanate from the box itself, a chorus of the damned that filled my apartment with their unseen presence. I began to see things, glimpses of figures reflected in mirrors and windows. Gone when I blinked, a shadowy form standing at the foot of my bed, watching me with unseen eyes before dissipating into the darkness. Sleep became elusive, filled with nightmares of being trapped in endless, twisting corridors, the box always just out of reach. Desperate for answers, I turned to the internet, diving into forums and websites dedicated to the paranormal. I learned of objects that were believed to contain spirits, cursed items that brought misfortune to their owners. The more I read, the more convinced I became that the box was such an object, a container for something ancient and malevolent. My search for knowledge led me to stories of rituals and ceremonies, ancient practices meant to contain or banish spirits. The idea of performing such a ritual was both terrifying and compelling. If there was a chance it could end the haunting, I was willing to take it. The decision to confront the entity tied to the box was not made lightly. Armed with knowledge gleaned from ancient texts and the advice of those more versed in the supernatural than myself, I prepared for a ritual meant to seal the spirit back within its wooden prison. The air in my apartment felt heavy with anticipation. Or perhaps it was my own fear manifesting as a tangible weight on my shoulders. On the night of the ritual, the atmosphere was electric, charged with an unseen energy that made every shadow seem alive, every noise a harbinger of unseen horrors. I had drawn a circle of salt around myself, a protective barrier against the entity, and placed the box at the circle's center. The candles flickered as though in a breeze. Though the air was still, I began to recite the incantations, the ancient words feeling awkward on my tongue. As the ritual progressed, the temperature dropped, breaths visible in the air despite the warmth of the season. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to press in from all sides, begging, threatening, warning. Then, with a suddenness that took my breath away, silence fell. It was in this silence that the entity made itself known. The box began to shake, vibrating with an unseen force. From the shadows, a form coalesced, a figure made of darkness. Its features blurred but its intent unmistakably malevolent. I could feel its anger, a palpable force that threatened to overwhelm the protective circle. I continued the ritual, my voice steady despite the fear that clawed at my throat. With the final word spoken, the figure screamed, a sound that was not of this world, filled with rage and despair. And then, it was gone. The candles blew out simultaneously, plunging the room into darkness. And when the lights returned, the box was still, its carvings no longer seeming to dance in the light but instead appeared dormant, lifeless. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe it was over. The following days were uneventful. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, the whispers silenced. I had begun to dismantle the protections, to put away the symbols and texts that had become my constant companions. Life, it seemed, could return to normal, but peace is often fleeting when dealing with forces beyond our understanding. It was a small thing that first made me question whether the ritual had been as successful as I believed. A photograph, taken during the ritual as a record of the event, showed not the expected scene of candles and salt circles, but a blur of shadows, with two bright spots where the box should have been. It was as if the camera had captured something my eyes could not. Then, the dreams began. Vivid nightmares that left me waking in a cold sweat, filled with a sense of impending doom. In these dreams, the box was always present, its lid slowly opening to reveal an abyss that seemed to pull at my very soul. But it was the final discovery that confirmed my worst fears. Returning home one evening, I found the box open, its lid ajar as though inviting inspection. Inside, instead of the expected emptiness, was a single word carved into the wood. A word that had not been there before, free. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The ritual had not contained the entity, it had released it, freed from its wooden prison. What had I unleashed upon the world? And more importantly, what would it require of me now that it was unbound? The whispers returned that night, clearer than before. A voice speaking directly into my mind. "Thank you," it said, a mockery of gratitude that chilled me to the bone. "We are not done, you and I."